Sydney is a young girl who loved nothing more than reading creepy stories on Reddit late at night.
She lived in New York City with her single mom, who was always busy working as an accountant in the busy streets.
However, one Christmas, Sydney received a gift from her grandmother that would change her life forever. It was a doll with curly blonde hair and blue eyes. Sydney loved the doll and spent hours playing with it. However, she began to notice strange things happening around the apartment. The doll would move on its own, randomly appearing and disappearing, and even seemed to talk to herself when everyone was sleeping. At first, Sydney tried to ignore the strange occurrences, thinking it was just her imagination. However, as the days went by, the doll's behavior grew more and more erratic. It would whisper strange things to her when she was alone, and Sydney began to feel as though she was being watched. As the weeks went by, Sydney's fear grew, and she realized that she was living a creepypasta story of her own. She was being haunted by a possessed doll, and she didn't know what to do. One night, as Sydney was reading her Reddit stories, she heard the sound of the doll's laughter coming from the darkness. She tried to ignore it, but it only grew louder and more maniacal.
Finally, Sydney decided to confront the doll.
She grabbed a flashlight and headed towards the spot where the doll had been last seen. As she approached, she could feel a sense of dread wash over her. She shone the flashlight at the doll, hoping to expose its true nature. To her horror, the doll's eyes began to glow with an eerie light. It started to move towards her, its arms reaching out as though to strangle her. Sydney tried to run, but the doll was too fast. It seemed to move with an otherworldly grace, and Sydney knew that it was no longer just a doll, but something far more sinister. As the doll cornered Sydney, she realized that she had to act fast. She swung her flashlight at the doll, but it dodged her attack with ease. The doll was now in control, and Sydney knew that she was in trouble. With a sinister smile, the doll disappeared into the shadows. Sydney could hear its eerie laughter coming from the darkness, and she knew that she was not alone. She started to run, hoping to escape the doll's grasp, but it was always one step ahead of her. The doll led Sydney to the attic, where it cornered her in a dark corner.
Sydney could hear its whispering voice coming from the darkness, and she knew that she was in trouble.
Finally, Sydney decided to fight back. She grabbed a nearby candlestick and swung it at the doll with all her might. The doll fell to the ground, lifeless. In the aftermath of the encounter, Sydney felt a sense of relief wash over her. She knew that she had lived a creepypasta story of her own, and that the dangers of the internet were all too real. From that day on, Sydney continued to read Reddit stories, but she knew that she would never take them lightly again. She had experienced something truly terrifying, and she knew that she would never forget the creepypasta story that had become her reality.